Those of us here on Power Lunch were really struck by a recent quote in Trader Monthly magazine about billionaire natural gas trader John Arnold and the nemesis he took down over at Amaranth. This was all about the big winners and losers for the year. In the Clash of the Titans, John Arnold took on Brian Hunter and squeezed his foe like a laundress wringing out a wet tube sock, I should say, or stock as the case may be, which got all of us wondering about that so-called killer instinct and why traders often turn to coaches to keep that sharp edge, much the same way that professional athletes use sports psychologists. So we're going to try and go inside the mind of a trader now with executive coach Maggie Craddock and CNBC's own fast money trader Jeff Mackey. Jeff, thanks. I'm going to start with you if I could.
Sure.
Because, you know, when we were talking about John Arnold versus Brian Hunter, it had me wondering, because a lot of people on the street talked about how they really were facing off against each other. When you're trading, do you know frequently the guy who's on the other side of a large trade, and is it a kind of I want to best him sort of thing with you or not?
You know, the other guy on the other side of the trade, Sue, is invariably pretty much evil incarnate and dumb as a box of rocks. I mean, that's those are the two things he has in common. The names change, but that tends to be the commonality they always have. And of course, you know, it's by definition, if you're buying something someone else is selling, and so you disagree with that person on a fundamental basis in terms of what's going on, I think that we bring that air of competitiveness to it in every trade we make.
Okay, so you do that every time.
I do, and it is a trap. I mean, it illustrates you can take it too far. You know, ask anyone who's short, say, Amazon or Jones Soda today, two stocks up over 5%, how they feel about the guys on the other side of that trade. You can take that too far and really kind of dig in too much because they're emotionally vested in that. But that is definitely something that goes on every time you make a trade, I think.
Maggie, what do you hear from the people that you trade with and you coach on how to trade? What are the characteristics that you see?
There are characteristics that can make a great trader. And Jeff, I like what you said about the fact that you can take it too far. Because when we're working with traders, we want them to think in terms of patterns, presence, and power. Because it's all about risk management in the market. And so in terms of those patterns, traders really have to be clear about what's going on inside themselves in terms of their competitive instincts and when enough is enough. Interestingly enough, of all the clients that we work with on Wall Street, traders often have to be the most intuitive and the most introspective about their gut instincts in terms of what's happening in a business situation.
So you worked up some basic keys.
Absolutely.
And you say it's physical but intuitive. The gut instinct goes beyond logic and more self-reflective than anyone on Wall Street. That's interesting because the self-reflective I wouldn't necessarily think would fit.
You know, this is an irony that actually makes a lot of people laugh, because when you think of the people that are really going to be self-reflective, you think of the NFL locker room mentality on the trading floor. But actually, it's the traders who can be the most self-reflective when they understand how realizing their relationships around trust and how they deal with risk from the inside out can be worth hundreds of millions of dollars to them.
You know, Jeff, Maggie also says that one of the characteristics of a really savvy trader and a successful one is there are mood swings faster than a Ferrari changing lanes on the Autobahn, which I think actually really describes Dylan Ratigan more than it does you, but...
It does a little bit, but maybe that's the commonality that allows Dylan to sit in the middle of all of us.
Yeah. Tell me how you approach a particular trade. How do you do it?
You know, it's for me, one of the keys that I'm looking for is to understand the thinking of the person on the other side of the trade. In addition to being, you know, dumb as a box of rocks and evil incarnate, they do have a thought process that went into that trade that they're making. And if you can understand what they think, what you believe as someone on the other side of that trade, and how the two differ, that helps me keep score in terms of where the trade's going on a day-to-day basis. Again, the enemy, while its emotion is a necessary evil or just a key aspect to it that you can't get rid of, good or bad, for me, the hardest thing to do, and I think why the most successful traders really are self-reflective, is the ability to say when you're wrong. And you can't do that when you're in a blood death match with somebody. You can only do it when you have kind of a scorecard checklist beyond just the price to keep track of in terms of what's happening in the company developments that may agree with what my original thesis was or disagree with it, and then have the discipline to get out. You do need to be self-reflective to do those, to maintain that discipline.
Maggie, you also say that a lot of the success comes down to your family history.
Absolutely.
And the father figure
Absolutely.
How so?
Well, because, you know, Jeff, as you were saying, you have to be able to know when you're wrong. It's actually the earliest lessons in life, in the family, where people learn a lot about competitive instincts, power, ego, and even when to stop and admit that you might be wrong. And many of the traders who have tremendous talent when it comes to sticking with something short term and drive and all of this have to be crystal clear in terms of their own reactions and instinct. When are they operating on logic? When has emotion swept them away? And they learn in their family system when enough is enough. And how to stop and reflect on themselves. And when they understand those patterns inside themselves, they don't get swept away by emotion as much, and they're able to invoke that kind of logic that Jeff was talking about, which is critical not just to making money in any one trade, but the number of trades consistently with which you can make it.
What do you think, Jeff?
You know, I think that definitely rings true. I mean, it's again, the real litmus test of something like this is if you can apply it to yourself under stress. It's easy for me to sit here in the abstract and talk about how calm and in touch with my emotions I am, but you know, when you're getting your face kicked in on a trade, that's when this skill becomes so critical, and that's also when it's most difficult to apply.
I'm really glad that Jeff said that, because the work kicks in not with just how you're thinking, but what happens when you can't think at all.
Yeah. Thank you both very much, Maggie and Jeff.